Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 374, recorded for Monday, November 3rd, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft. It's available across all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including a video version on YouTube and one on Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me as always is my friend Johnny, who you may find lurking around castles in England. Hello, sir.
Hello, yes, I have been doing a little bit of field research as far as Minecraft building goes. We went to Arundel Castle this week since my father-in-law is in town, and if you want to hear more about that, you can hear it in the render distance. That's the extended version of the podcast that patrons get to listen to if they support us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks, check out any of our paid tiers, and you'll get access to an extended version of the show. We talk for about another 15 minutes to 30 minutes every week. We also have monthly hangouts and quarterly hangouts where folks can share what they've been up to in Minecraft and also hear a little bit about the inside baseball of what it takes to make the podcast, all the facts and figures, download numbers, YouTube metrics, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in any of that, once again, head over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
This week on the episode, the mayhem continues to mount as Mojang has announced 2 new mobs that are joining the Minecraft world in the latest Snapshot. Before we get to that, though, we're going to check in with our quick login and find out what Johnny has been doing on the survival guide.
Well, it'll surprise no one to hear that I have been working on David, finally. Now that I have the space for it, my copper aging machine, aka David, because it began as a copper field, is now under construction. It's taking a while, of course, because it's a very, it's layered as a redstone contraption goes, and this version more so than the others. I'm starting out with the same mechanisms that I've had before, where there are capture circuits. A flying machine will take little rows of copper. About 9 blocks of copper is about as much as I could fit onto a flying machine. This will go down these rows where pistons will basically pull copper blocks off the flying machine as it passes and separate them 4 blocks apart so they can age as efficiently as possible. So I've assembled the first 5 rows of 8 for layer 1 of this machine. And that's just the capture circuits. There are still plenty of steps that need completing. I need to add a bunch of shovels to the droppers that effectively count how many aging stages the copper block goes through before it's done and it gets popped back out of the machine again. There's 18 droppers per row that need filling. They each need 4 shovels, and so for this entire room's worth, I need 576 shovels just for the layer that I'm working on. So obviously, shovels I chose because they're an unstackable item and they don't take up a whole lot of materials. It's 2 sticks and a plank each time. So they're probably the cheapest thing I could do it with, unless I built a slightly more high output iron farm, and even then it would just be how compact are the materials I'm carrying around with me. I can carry around iron blocks and make shears or something like that, right? But I've got enough wood lying around that it was easy enough to do this with. I'm also building bits of the machine out of wood because I've gone with the same color palette I used to build it in Creative, which is light blue terracotta for the sort of floors of each of these, but then all of the machinery parts are made out of dark oak wood. And it's a nice contrast, it's a nice sort of warm wood color, and I didn't really need to worry too much about the specifics of it. I feel like if I was going to make any more aesthetic considerations, I was just going to take all day. So I brought logs down with me so that they could break into planks nice and easily. And that also means the redstone lines are on some kind of material that's not just the bare rock of the cave floor, so that I can, easily go around and identify what's got redstone on it, what hasn't, when I want to redecorate later. But I still need to build things like the flying machine that feeds the copper blocks into each of these rows. The redstone lines that signal the flying machine to return need to be added in. And then above all of this, there's going to be a general loading and unloading mechanism. So I'll be able to put down basically a 9x8 pad of copper, and that's going to be picked up by a flying machine, divided up amongst all of these rows, and then a different set of flying machines is going to take off and deliver each row of copper blocks into the machine to be split apart. And then once they're all returned, it's going to pick those up again, deliver them to a platform where I can break them, whether manually or I might try and work out a version of this that works with TNT. And then all of that's got to be timed so the flying machines don't run into each other in mid-air and, pick up bits of the returning flying machines and carry them with them. So, yeah, I'm probably forgetting other bits and pieces of this as well because it's all built in Creative and I just haven't referred back to this version for a while. But once I started building these capture circuits, because there's something I built several times before in all of the different iterations of this machine, I got into a rhythm very quickly, which is good because I need to do this fast if I'm going to be able to complete it all within a reasonable time frame. And yeah, I did the first 4 rows on stream and did 1 off stream, and it's kind of like getting back on a bike. It's kind of like, okay, I remember the rhythm of this. I remember how this works, and fortunately, having designed it myself, I'm sort of in no doubt as to when redstone components are missing, because if something doesn't behave the way I expect it to, I go, I think I know what's causing that. So the general benefit of having designed this myself and not having to troubleshoot it against a video tutorial somebody else has made or something is becoming evident at this point, when inevitably I forget to put a redstone torch here, an observer there, that kind of thing.
I mean, that's really cool that you've got that kind of knowledge now burned into your brain, because as you've been talking about the flying machines, I'm pretty savvy with some basic redstone circuits. Something complex, I can maybe sort out my own way of doing it, which wouldn't be the most efficient and not really employ some of the more top tier techniques. But flying machines are part of the redstone ecosphere that I've just not wrapped my head around. I would always have to look up how to build one before I tried. Like if you said, hey, you're streaming tomorrow, you're going to build a flying machine live on stream. Nope. I'm going to have to look it up. Like I don't know how necessarily to best go about that. And it's cool that because you've designed this yourself and it is part of, now the Minecraft kind of pop culture as like the David copper aging machine. It's really cool that you've got that kind of redstone vernacular that you can just kind of go back to and potentially apply to other things going forward if Minecraft comes out with another block that has aging capabilities, or if there's another thing or another problem that you want to solve with a flying machine or with a similar type of counting system or stuff like that, to have those kind of things available. And also, I mean, I was thinking, well, it's convenient that you're bringing down the logs for both the decoration and the shovels. Shovels are also something that you could do with bamboo. Like if you really were pressed for materials, or somebody else was pressed for materials copying your David design, they could just do bamboo, bone meal it, or like do a very quick farm, and you would have a renewable source of shovels very quickly. Like you really wouldn't have to worry about it. And I like the choice of dark oak as well, because right now there's no copper in the machine that I'm looking at in the screenshots, but dark oak is about as close to a black as you can get with a wood color. So it blends in really well with all of the black and gray redstone pieces like observers and the backs of pistons and stuff like that. But then it also is a great contrast with both the unoxidized and the oxidized copper. So like your copper is also going to show up very easily as it moves through the machine, which is probably both practical but also going to look really cool. Because you were talking a week or two ago about like you weren't sure how this was going to be displayed or housed so that you could see it rather than hiding it all. And I think having a darker / neutral design to the mechanism will really help the product stand out.
Yeah, imagine if I was making this out of acacia or warped wood, and how frequently I'd be like, wait, that component over there is oxidized, but it hasn't ejected from the machine. Oh, wait, no, that's just a set of planks. It'd be be so easy. In the same way that everyone mistakes glow lichen for diamonds in caves now, it's that kind of that kind of problem would occur. But it's interesting because in the process of doing this, I discussed on stream another potential design for something like this that was very, like, relatively speaking, low redstone compared to this anyway. But I was thinking about other ways in which I could place a bunch of other copper blocks, things which aren't actually full blocks, like lightning rods and trapdoors and things like that, in a way that they could still be detected in how quickly they aged and ejected from some sort of system. And I came up with a version that requires the player to stand in a water stream, similar to, I don't know if you've seen this design for ice farms, but there'd be like a tray of ice that forms up out of water sources. The sources reform, but then the player is basically going around on like a track without Strider boots on and just kind of getting pushed around by water streams. And you're holding down the left mouse button with a silk touch pickaxe and farming the ice as you go, and then by the time you come back to the start again, it reforms. I was considering doing something like that, having the player pushed around on water streams, but instead of these large trays of ice, it's basically 4 blocks apart. There is a cavity in the wall in front of you, and you're holding down right click to place, a trapdoor, a lightning rod, whatever, like copper lanterns, stuff like that. that could still be detected using observers, and the same counting mechanism I'm using in this copper aging machine could still apply, where, you know, it just counts through the different aging stages. It counts one when you've placed the block there, and then 3 more like counts would be needed for it to have fully oxidized, 3 more state changes. And then after that's done, the mechanism could just push it upwards using a piston, and then you could have effectively it like ejects up onto a floor where you harvest all of the materials from again. And I was thinking about doing something like that for trapdoors, doors, bits and pieces like that. There are some of those that might also break when moved by a piston. I know lanterns do stuff like that, but that just means they drop them as item entities, at which point they could be maybe gathered by a water stream or something like that. So there are a couple of additional ideas that are percolating in the background as I'm designing this big copper block aging facility that make me think, what if I either like above or below this have a different mechanism entirely that still requires a little bit of player input, because you can't place blocks by any means other than the player placing them, with very few exceptions. So there are some ways that I might want to incorporate like a player still putting items in here, but having them like age as you're dragged around this massive room using a water stream, and then allowing that to sort of do the aging process for you. Very minimal redstone to count everything, and then just a very analog method of popping everything back up again, I think could still work. So I'm gonna tinker with a few more designs and maybe make a lo-fi version of David. So watch this space, because I'll update on that when I've got a bit more time put into testing the whole thing.
Even on a smaller scale, I could see that working, where you don't necessarily want to have it be automatic to replace the blocks, but even if you just want to age like, I don't know, a dozen lanterns, and to put them all on a hopper with an observer that counts and a piston that breaks the lantern, and it just kind of goes into the hopper, and then goes into, and they all go into one chest, and all you have to do is just wait for your, essentially your field to clear, go to the chest and grab your 12, aged lanterns at that point. I'm opting for a different way of getting copper. I'm just going to mine out a trial chamber. So
yeah,
I'm hoping that at the end of that, I'll have enough where I probably won't need to mine it for a while or age it for a while. We'll have to see. The good news, of course, there is that it's all waxed and it's usually already aged. So you can strip it down to the patina that you want and then wax it again. So I might have to make a bee farm, but at least I don't have to worry about the aging. But I really think this is such a cool way of taking something that on the surface, when you see it as a Minecraft feature, feels very player interactive, very arduous, long, requires patience. And when you're working at this scale, it takes so long for you're not changing how long it takes copper to age, but because of how much this machine can do, it doesn't feel that way. So like by the time you're aging the last row, the first row is probably well on its way. Right? It's like having a super smelter, right? Like it takes forever for 1 or 2 furnaces to do something. But if you've got 64 furnaces, it's a huge amount of work to set that up. But the reward is that you put in a stack, and a stack comes out a second later, or 3 seconds later, right? And I think it's a really cool way of taking what is otherwise a manual process in Minecraft and turning it into something that's automatic.
Yeah, that's the goal, at least. Is like I've always said that this is not necessarily going to be the most efficient thing in terms of time and material cost put into it, but it's definitely a really fun way of aging copper and an excuse to build a big giant redstone machine that I'm still very proud of. So
yeah. It's way more fun than just spacing them out in a field manually and waiting for them to change and then walking around and mining them up. Like you do that all the time in Minecraft for all kinds of stuff. If there's an option to not mine it up by hand, I want that option, even if it's more work.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same reason that people make complex sort of payment mechanisms for shops on multiplayer servers instead of just having a chest and operating on the honor system, right? So yeah. It's a bit of fun. It's one of the few redstone systems things that I've really committed to in the past and had success with. So I'm looking forward to continuing to rebuild that and expect a lot more updates in the near future. That's me. Anyway, what's new on the Citadel?
So I have been moving a lot of mycelium and mushroom blocks around because I've been clearing out some space to break ground for what will be the command center in the middle of the island. I'm deciding to stay where I am. There's enough options underground that if some of the farms I've built already are not performing the best, which they are now because I'm expanding what I'm doing and how far I'm wandering on the island, which means my creeper farm is actually loading in a lot more than I thought. I almost have a full shulker box of gunpowder there. So like that's enough for me for I haven't run out of gunpowder or rockets yet, and it's already full. So that's kind of a good sign. And it's only one floor for that creeper farm too. So I've been just clearing off mushrooms. Part of it was I needed to clear the land to see where I wanted to go. When you look at the mushroom island, it just looks like a mushroom island. But when you start to remove the mushrooms and you're just looking at empty mycelium, then I start to think about like what I could do with the landscape, what I could do with the building. You start to notice the highs and the lows of the mycelium as well. Not that there's a lot. It goes up by maybe 5 or 6 blocks. I've decided that my base level is going to be Y70. And so I'm operating as that's kind of like a flat ground. I will remove some, but I will probably keep some rolling hills depending on what is needed when I get there. But as a result, I have shulker boxes upon shulker boxes of mycelium and mushroom blocks. And there's a lot more brown mushroom blocks than you realize. It's about twice as many brown as there are red on a mushroom island. And I've been, some folks on the server like Cosmic have requested, oh, hey, if you don't want those, I'll take those off your hand. Well, they got a shulker box of each, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a nice gift for server mates that have helped me out in the past by dropping materials off to West Hill, right? So I get to drop some materials that they want back off to them, which is wonderful. Other server mates are going to be getting shulker boxes full of mushroom and mycelium if they want, because I don't want to store it. And so it'll be like, this is a gift of a shulker box disguised as I don't want to store this stuff. You figure out what to do with it, which made me think about like how useless mushroom blocks are outside of the brown mushroom blocks are great for organic decoration, great for texturing, sure. But if you're doing anything like what I'm doing, they're not useful at all. And the red mushroom blocks, you'd have to have some very specific use cases for those. They're not exactly, if you're not building your own red mushroom house, then you're kind of not using them for a heck of a lot. And unless you can correct me, you can't smelt them. You can't craft them into anything else. Brown mushrooms, the item can be made into soup, but like that's kind of it. The blocks are really not useful. You can't use them as fuel. Like they don't burn like logs, which is weird. I would have thought they would have, considering that I believe you can use a nolium log in the nether, like one of the hyphae stems. Like that works just like a log in a furnace, right? So it's weird that you've got this particular biome that has mountains of this stuff and you can't do anything with it. So it would be cool if we could craft something new, or it could be used as a fuel or something in the future for Mojang that wants to, increase the game, push the game forward, but also like find other ways to use blocks that have been in the game for a while, which we always, review positively on the show because it's such a fun thing when you add something new to the game, but then all of a sudden it also creates a use for an older block. So a lot of the stuff I've been doing has been centered around moving stuff around because, as I mentioned, I've been breaking ground for the new command center. And I'll share a couple of files here. One is by Ahmed Hani, and one is by Tyler Fury. They're architecture concepts from artstation.com. I just typed in sci-fi buildings and started combing through some stuff. And I chose this on purpose because it is a black and white drawing. It means I can kind of come up with my own color scheme without being influenced by, the existing concept art. And the single image is the one that I'm going for, the one that looks like it might be kind of like an X or have like it almost looks like a battleship in terms of the building. Actually, some people popping in were like, are you building a spaceship or are you building a base? And it's like, it's a base that looks like a spaceship, honestly. And I went in, I didn't actually grab the other screenshot, but I dropped it into Affinity and I reduced the opacity and then started drawing pixel art over top of it. I reduced it to a scale where the top narrow window at the top of one of the wings is 3 blocks tall. And so I kind of extrapolated from there and tried to make everything kind of go in the way that I wanted to. The tricky part, of course, is that all of these buildings are drawn in perspective. So I'm turning it into a plus sign when it's actually more of an X in the design. So some of the measurements I have to consider, like this is actually being viewed at an angle. So it looks like it's 15 blocks wide, but it's probably closer to 21 because it's on like a small angle on the camera. But it's been fun. I've been bouncing around and moving some temporary farms, removing some, creating some footprints. I created a couple of different boxes around my central hub that were at different intervals of like 30, 40, and 20 as a radius, so I can kind of gauge like how big do I want this to be. I'm also taking into consideration like if I want a door to a big facility, that door is probably going to feel better if it's 5 blocks deep. So that means the wall is going to be at least that. So how big do I have to make this so that inside doesn't feel claustrophobic and I still have like plenty of depth to work with? Because something that we don't have a lot of in a sci-fi palette is stairs and slabs. So to get depth on a wall, you're really dealing with block changes. And so I wanted to make sure that I had at least a 5 block depth on the outside wall so I could add different layers as I need to. And so as a result, it feels really chunky and really large, but I think I'll be happy with it. Like future Joel will be happy that I didn't make the walls too thin or plan for things to have a little bit more flexibility to them. So it's been fun. I've switched my material of choice to polished diorite as a block for scaffolding and laying things out, because it is one of the few blocks that has a border on it that is instantly breakable when you have beacons around. Smooth stone does not. Smooth stone is slower, and if you're quickly making changes, it's a real pain. So one of the benefits of having this symmetrical build, which I mentioned before when I was building West Hill, is that I've got 4 different wings. So I'm building a rough structure for each wing, slightly different in terms of scale, height, length, and just kind of feeling out what looks good. The first one was a good concept to say like, yeah, I think I'm going to like this build. The second one was a more accurate attempt. I did shrink it down a little bit, and I think I may have to bring it back up. Like I think I made it a little bit too stubby. And so it doesn't look like the building as much. It also doesn't have the same vibe that I wanted. It doesn't have that weird kind of like futuristic cantilever. Like that is so big and so long. How is it being held up in that position? And I want that kind of feeling. And so I'm trying to balance that with, I don't want this thing to take over the entire island. Like I want it to be in the middle, but I don't want it to be so big that it's the only thing you look at when you're around. So I'm kind of making sure that I'm keeping it at a decent scale. And I'm looking forward to figuring out what's going to happen inside. I know I'm going to continue to have my little manual storage hub, which works out very, very well. I've actually had some compliments in the comments on YouTube saying like, I really like the way that you've done this with shulker boxes, and like it's not double chests full of stuff. It's very color coded, like it's easy to get around. It is all manual though. And so it's a great way to do like your working storage room, like the thing that you need to do to build other things. I'm still not sure if I'm looking at doing an automatic storage at all. I think I'm just leaning on having the farms themselves put things in shulker boxes and have those shulker boxes delivered to me. I think that's all I'm going to do. Any bulk storage is probably going to be manual, or a very small kind of like utility room where I might store mycelium or stone or things. If I do any big digs, I might have to have something like that. But so far I've just been messing around with some shapes. So again, it's a week where I've not really built anything, but there's been a lot of progress because in order to make this faster, I added 4 more beacons to the area. I was messing around with a shulker box loader thanks to Wormbo, who sent a link in the chat, and all I was doing there was building it just so I could see how much space it takes up. So like if I wanted to have this hidden in a floor or in a wall, I needed to know how deep that wall needed to be. And the answer is deep. Like those things are large if you want them to be in a slice. If you don't want them to be in a slice, then they can be really small now. And those are really, really cool. So again, debating on whether that shulker box loading is happening at the farm location or at the central hub location. I'm leaning on farm.
Yeah, I think even the shulker box loaders I have for my tree farm back at spawn are like at least 2 wide. I think maybe even 3 wide. Like they're like kind of a 3x3 footprint because you need a bunch of stuff around them. So yeah, I sympathize with the struggle of trying to get a shulker box loader into a single 1 wide like vertical slice like that. It's a tricky one. But yeah, I do like the idea of having the storage basically be all shulker boxes because it feels more futuristic. It feels kind of like, you know, a container that opens sort of horizontally at you from the wall feels way more futuristic than big wooden chest, or I suppose 3 or 4 different colors of big copper chest we have now, but still doesn't feel any more futuristic in that regard. I think it's great seeing the shape of this come together, and especially when you provided the context from the Zero's world map shot where you've got it from the air, from the top down, in minimap form. And I think it's great to see the amount of space this is taking up, but also the sketching process. Something about there being all of those kind of sketched lines of material where you're shaping things out, that looks kind of like a sci-fi almost circuit diagram to me right now. And so it's sort of a shame that eventually when you tidy that stuff up, I imagine it's going to go away again. But there's something about that feels like kind of like a blueprint coming together when seen from the top down. So obviously in 3D space it looks a little different, and it's kind of taking shape pretty well. But I like the source material. I like the fact that it feels like anonymous enough that you're not going for a specific sci-fi inspiration, but still sci-fi enough that it's recognizably like, this is not an architectural style that we build with in 21st century global Earth. Like that isn't really the way things are built here. It's got like a little touch of Mass Effect to it, but I think that's mainly just the numerals on the side, like the amount of stuff that's like little hyphenated codes for what all of the buildings might be, what modules they would be or whatever. But I think aside from that, it looks distinct, but sort of not like tied to any specific franchise, that it's clear you're doing Star Wars or Mass Effect or whatever it would happen to be. So I think this is a really, really promising start.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's shaping up to be a lot of fun, and I'm trying to, like, as it's an ability that I have, is to take inspiration from the image and make it my own down the line. And I definitely want to work with some color. So I know that while right now the main area is like white concrete and purple concrete, I'm trying not to let that influence more white happening, because again, that's a lot of concrete. So I want to try and figure out other materials that I might be able to incorporate and have the color happen in layers and accents. And I've talked before about like that 70-30 rule. And a lot of this might be some form of stone or gray, but then have like the other 30% be the color pops and the different things. And the number, I'm actually going to be having the wings numbered. I think I'm going to do 1 through 4, north, south, east, west, that kind of thing. And the numbers themselves, for people wondering at home, are probably going to be between 7 and 9 blocks tall, and then between 5 and 7 blocks wide. So in the same way that your, alarm clock would display kind of like those pixelated numbers, that's kind of what I'm going for. And so those numbers have to be quite large in order to be something that I can make out of a material that makes sense. Redstone blocks, frog lights, like whatever I happen to be doing. I could also do something like I mentioned, I think it was last week on the show, where I could have the concrete be behind the wall, and instead of having the wall have the number on it, I could cut the number out of the wall, and then behind that could be any color I want, yellow, green, blue, like whatever bright concrete color you want to show through. And then it would be interesting, because then you wouldn't be able to read the number as well unless you were looking at it straight on. Like there would be some play there. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it yet. Those level of details are things that I'm going to have room to do, because these things are so big that I did a quick mock-up on the ground and said, okay, well, this is what it would look like if this thing was, 17 or 20 blocks wide. I still had lots of room to wander around inside and have a wall of shulker boxes on either side of me and not have to worry about it. What I was afraid of was building this thing so big that, in a way, it's very similar to your storage room. Like each wing is probably going to have different amounts of shulker boxes in it. But I didn't want the space from one wall to the other to be so long that it felt like torture to, like, oh, I need to go get this. It's on this side of the storage room. Oh, I need that other block. That's on the other side of the same corridor, but it's going to be 20 blocks away. Like it doesn't feel as convenient. So I'm going to try to figure out like the right level of distance and convenience inside so that it works for me. Yeah. Also, having that extra space is great, because it means that, akin to the outside being 5 blocks deep, I'd like my interior walls to maybe have 3 blocks of depth, because I might want to have like buried lights, layers, concrete, stuff behind walls. So like I want to make sure I have enough room to do the things I want to do.
Yeah. You mentioning using polished diorite to kind of block things out. First of all, really great idea, because it's also a block you can count very easily. The bevel around the outside makes it very easy to kind of go like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of it all being like the same texture. Like if you're using raw diorite for that, like you wouldn't be able to see the beginning and end of each block, and it gets very, very difficult. But since you mentioned diorite, one of the things I learned when I was detailing the giant ore extractor thing that I built on Minecraft SOS was how effective it is to weather stuff that's all white concrete using like large patches of diorite, and then if you want a further weathered spot inside of that, just switch to andesite, and it just needs to be those 3 blocks. But I did that in sort of almost randomized spots, but it creates this very natural weathered look for something that's meant to be futuristic, like metal that's been painted white and the paint has just started to peel. And I'm sure that's something that, like, you'd consider once it got up to scale. But yeah, I want to drive home the point that can look very, very effective if done in sort of the right sort of spots. So that's definitely something to consider, especially if anyone else is looking to follow in Joel's footsteps and try out this sci-fi style for yourselves.
I've also seen polished diorite used as the building material for sci-fi builds in some of the quick references that I looked up. And if your style is to have like plate metal that's all kind of like riveted together, then polished diorite is actually a pretty attractive texture. It's regular diorite is the one that a lot of people are just like, woof, like, why are we using this? But the polished one, it comes with stairs and slabs, and you could make these cool shapes, and it does kind of pair well with like an orange concrete or a stripe or something. And it does sort of look like, in context, a lot of weathered metal plating, stuff that used to be white but has been like hit by asteroids or bumped around or had rain or stuff happen to it. So moving on to the news, we have a new snapshot. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W44A was published on Tuesday, October 28th. New features in 25W44A, the Parched, a new skeleton variant. It spawns in a light level of 0 in deserts, replacing some of the regular skeletons. Does not burn in sunlight, shoots arrows of weakness, has a slower rate of fire compared to the normal skeletons, similar to the Bogged actually. Does not spawn in caves, following the Husk's spawning rules. And the Camel Husk, a new undead camel variant. It spawns at a light level of 0 in deserts, does not burn in sunlight, spawns with 2 riders, a husk wielding a spear and a parched, does not spawn in caves, following the husk's spawning rules. Like other undead mounts, it is hostile if the rider is a hostile mob, and passive without a rider. It despawns like other hostile mobs, but becomes persistent when ridden by a player. Its favorite food is a rabbit foot. It cannot be bred, and as a mount, they work similar to normal camels. Advancements have been also added to include the parched and the camel husk. Spear changes. Reduced the number of hunger points consumed by using lunge across all enchantment levels. Lunge 1 now consumes 1 hunger point. Lunge 2 consumes 2 hunger points. And Lunge 3 consumes 3 hunger points. That's reduced from 4, 5, and 6 points respectively. Added a durability cost of 1 for using lunge across all the enchantment levels. New graphical options, anisotropic filtering. This new option improves the visual quality of blocks when viewed at a distance or at an angle. The default depends on your graphic presets, and the values are off, 2x, 4x, and 8x. If your hardware does not support it, it will not be used. This significantly impacts video memory usage, especially combined with a high mipmap count. Changes in 25W44A. Parrot can now mimic sounds of the Zombie Nautilus, Zombie Horse, Camel Husk, and the Parched. Nautilus and Zombie Nautilus can now attack any mob if provoked by that mob, not just players. Environmental fog in the Nether is no longer dependent on the render distance setting and will be consistently applied from 10 to 96 blocks. Horses, mules, donkeys, and camels no longer sink in water while ridden by a player. Chunks now fade in instead of appearing out of nowhere, with the fade in time adjustable through video settings. Bats no longer spawn more frequently and in higher light levels between October 20th and November 3rd. Under UI changes, in the interface, inside the video settings screen has been renamed to Preferences. The single biome customization screen now has a search box, and the language selection screen now also has a search box to filter languages. Technical changes in 25W44A. The data pack version is now 92. The resource pack version is now 72. The Minecraft Server Management Protocol version is now 2.0.0. Added support for KQ and OS X to improve network connection performance. Under game rule, there are some changes. Game rules have been moved into a registry. With that, all game rules have been renamed from their previous camel case names to resource locations in snake case. For example, the game rule do daylight cycle is now replaced with Minecraft advanced time. There are lots of technical changes that are too crunchy to mention here in the newsread, but worth reading if you're interested. A number of notable bug fixes are that the player model in the inventory screen renders in the wrong orientation when it is not standing up straight, gaps between fences of the item model and complex box models, arrows and tridents get stuck on players and mobs, Nautilus do not deal damage if mob griefing is false, held items in third-person view show strange artifacts when viewed at certain angles. The full details of this week's bug fixes and other technical changes can be found in the Minecraft.net changelog, and that's going to be linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
The Java team has also published an article about removing obfuscation in Java Edition. We'll have a link to that as well in our show notes. To quote the article, for a long time, Java Edition has used obfuscation, hiding parts of the code, a common practice in the gaming industry. Now we're changing how we ship Minecraft Java Edition to remove obfuscation completely. We hope that with this change, we can pave a future for Minecraft Java Edition where it's easier to create, update, and debug mods. This follows on from a change in 2019 when Mojang released the obfuscation mappings for Java Edition, allowing modders to decode obfuscated data. Quote, starting with the next snapshot, we will provide unobfuscated experimental release versions alongside obfuscated ones. Modders will be able to use these to test their tools and workflows before we transition to fully non-obfuscated versions. The plan is that the first snapshot following the complete Mounts of Mayhem launch will be the first version without obfuscation. The article goes on to say, just a quick reminder, these changes don't affect the Minecraft end-user license agreement and Minecraft usage guidelines. Both will still apply to Minecraft Java Edition and any mods. So if you're interested in that, once again, check out our changelog and the link to that article over at thespawnchunks.com.
There's a fair bit to unpack in this week's snapshot. We're going to save our thoughts about the parched and the camel husks for the main discussion this week. But there are other things that we can touch on. And the one thing that grabbed my attention was the anisotropic filtering and chunks fading in, which I really didn't know was going to change. And it's a welcome shift. I watched the Exumavoid video, as I often do, to see video reference of this kind of stuff. And it's a very pleasant experience to have the chunks fade in. You can have it be too slow or too fast, depending on how you crank the setting. But it's much better than things popping in. And as someone that plays with a large render distance, because Westhill was like 22 chunks wide, so like I wanted to make sure that all of Westhill was in my screenshots, and I would log in and I would have to wait for the radius of chunks to start to load in. And until you get there, it looks really weird. It's not an immersive experience of like watching these like chunks kind of like pop into existence, but watching them slowly fade feels much more modern and works well if you're not moving that fast. Like I was up high taking a screenshot in spectator mode, but if you're just walking around, you might not even notice it depending on your render distance, depending on what's in front of you. If there's a big tree or a big hill, you might not even see the fade, which is great. And would probably be a lot more realistic as you're flying with Elytra. Fog clearing as you're passing through atmosphere, as opposed to just like things popping into existence, and hopefully flying into less things, because I do that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's much more noticeable when you're flying around, but it doesn't feel bad at all. I think it's reminiscent to me of how chunks load on Bedrock Edition, which has always felt like it had a more polished sort of rendering experience, obviously with increased render distance and everything being coded the way it is and optimized the way it is. But I do think it's a neat change, and I only played around with it on the default setting. I actually didn't look deep enough into the changelog to realize that you can actually adjust that in video settings. So to the extent where it felt unnatural for me because I've been playing Java Edition for over 10 years and I'm just used to the way chunks load, it might be worth tweaking that slider just a little bit just to see if there's a certain point at which it feels like a good combination of new and natural for me. But even if it was a static setting, I'm sure I would just get used to it over time.
Yeah, the mint map stuff that they changed before and the range at which these textures work as well is also really cool. I really like the way that the textures look at a distance. Like it just feels smoother. And again, if you're someone like me that is working on a 700 block wide Mushroom Island and you want to render in as much as you can, or you're building something that's large enough that the back of it might not come in at the same time at the front, then having those shaders, not shaders, sorry, textures, work more efficiently with graphics cards, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a couple of interesting technical changes under the hood in general this week. I took an interest in specifically the deobfuscation of stuff. Like that was something we mentioned on the show a while back because it happened in 2019, and we were still making the show then. But there was a bit of buzz around that, specifically just in terms of it making modders' jobs a lot easier because of the amount of guesswork and the sort of overall community effort that went into figuring out what all of the obfuscated terms within the code was when it was decompiled. And now, in the long term, I expect that modding and technical communities are going to be universally happy with the fact that code is no longer obfuscated. In the short term, though, this is something that I hadn't considered. A lot of mod loaders, and perhaps some of the mods themselves, work on the understanding that the code is obfuscated, and they use the obfuscated terms when they compile their own mod code. And so there's going to be a certain amount of unpicking that has to happen of all of those stitches that they've had to make sure everything fits in with like injecting the mod code into Java Edition. So they're going to have to remove everything that worked with the obfuscated code, deobfuscate all of that, and then apply it to the newer version, which I think is one of the reasons why they're not just making a hard switch from one to the other. They've said there's going to be this sort of transition period for a couple of months here, and the first snapshot that comes out after Mounts of Mayhem is officially released is going to be the first one that will be completely switched over. For now, they're using experimental versions, which, you know, is something that we've had our opinions about recently, but they're using it specifically for a version of the code that is not going to have that obfuscation, and I think that's really good as a sort of transitional step between one and the other. I think the other thing this has potential to do is create a pretty strong divide between older versions and newer versions. I see people being less likely, if they're getting into modding for the first time, to create mods for older versions pre-switch, because then they have to do a little bit of extra work in terms of making sure all of the obfuscated code matches up with the stuff that they're coding. But again, that's the side of the technical side of modding that I don't really know a whole lot about, so it may be that I'm misunderstanding some of that. If anybody has any experience with this kind of stuff and wants to weigh in about how deobfuscation is going to change your experience of modding Minecraft, please do write in to the email address spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Let us know, because we'd love to read some email about that on the show in the future.
Something else I'm sure people are excited about is the fact that your horses and mules are not going to sink when you try to cross a river. It's not something that I've done in a long time, but it's definitely something that I thought was weird when it did happen to me. I was like, well, this is strange. Like, why am I getting kicked off of this animal when I'm just trying to cross a river with it?
Yes, yeah, I think that's certainly the change that I've seen the most enthusiasm for this week has been that change. It seems sort of universally accepted, and apparently it still doesn't affect the undead horses. Like, skeleton horses will still ride along the bottom because they never kicked the rider off by sinking underwater in the first place. So if some players already have a setup that they enjoy being able to travel across the seabed by horse, that's not going to change. And apparently, I think the camel husks also ride underwater in the same way that skeleton horses do. So you've got a bit of variety there, and perhaps something that will help you dash over the underwater ravines that will pop up occasionally.
How do you feel about the game rule changes? Because that was kind of over my head. I didn't exactly follow, because I think it's just not something I'm familiar with, but it sounds like we're going to be learning new codes and new commands to type in.
Yeah, that was the thing that caught me this week, was realizing I do still use some of those game rule commands when I'm setting up like a temporary super flat world, for example, and I want to be able to turn fire spread on and off. That was one of the major changes, was that fire spread and I think it's like how close to the player fire tick can happen is now sort of merged into one game rule, and there are, I think, limited values to some of them, or they have a minimum value that they can't exceed, so you can't go into like the negative numbers on some of those anymore to get sort of weird results that would occasionally happen when the integer overflow kind of happens. But no, I think for a broader look at things, I think it's a good thing, because it's using some of the same like data format that a lot of the other commands already do. having it set in like a Minecraft category potentially allows space for folks who add their own game rules in through mod code and data packs and that kind of stuff to separate their game rules out from Minecraft's game rules in the same way that textures and block IDs and stuff are, and everything being sort of data driven in that sense, I think makes a lot of sense just from a syntax perspective. I think it's just going to be a learning curve for me sort of going, wait, do I still do daylight cycle or do I do advanced time? And like relearning some of the muscle memory that comes along with using those commands on a casual basis, I think is going to be the biggest deal. But most of the time I would have to do that stuff with the Minecraft wiki open unless it was some very basic commands that I was using anyway. So for the most part, I expect the experience will be mostly the same. I'll just be referring to the documentation once it's changed over and once everyone's got a firmer idea of what all of the new commands are. I expect it'll just be natural after a little while.
Yeah, the only thing that I use on a regular basis is just adding time to move the sun when I take screenshots. Like I just want a sunset and I'm sitting at, midday, I'll just add 4,000 to the time just to get it close to sunset. Not perfect, just close enough where I'm not waiting like 10 minutes to take a screenshot. Like I'll just fast forward a little bit. And that's the only thing I do. Like I don't reset or do daylight. Like I just try to advance. So the day count, like the actual playtime on the Citadel is like not accurate because of course I've been, over the course of years, every other time I stream, I'm just changing the time a little bit to take a screenshot for the thumbnail. And so, but that's the only one I use on a regular basis. I think when I used to have different snapshot worlds for thumbnails for the Spawn Chunks podcast, I would start a new world or jump in there. But now I just have the one snapshot world and I just update it whenever there's a new snapshot. I'm not precious about it. Like this is going to potentially corrupt your world, whatever. I'm using it for screenshots. Like I don't care. So I don't have to reset fire tick and mob spawning and like all that stuff that I would do to have uninterrupted screenshots. I just don't have to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the only times I will mess around with that stuff is like, if I'm doing a couple of experiments, like when I was making an upside down witch on a chicken recently, like I need to mess around with time and like maybe freeze time to make sure I've got enough time for a zombie villager to cure without having to put a roof over it in creative and that kind of thing. Like there's just like little fringe cases where I use these things, but it's good to know them just to have that information sort of in the back of my mind somewhere in case I need it for creative experiments. But either way, it'll just be something that the player base in general gets used to. One last thing to touch on before we move on from snapshot discussion. I think lunge as an enchantment is in a much better place now.
Right.
I think it's good to see that there's a mix of hunger loss and a sensible amount of durability loss. And I think that's a good, like a best of both worlds kind of outcome for everybody. I haven't tested it myself in survival yet, but even just having tested it last time with the amount of hunger loss that it had, which is twice the amount that it now has, I think it was balanced enough. Like it felt okay. You were having to, chug saturation, suspicious stew, or golden carrots or whatever every so often to make sure that you could use lunge more than a couple of times in a row. But I do think it's nice to have durability loss as part of it. It feels more consistent with other weapon skills like Riptide and so forth. And the hunger loss being less obviously means people can use it a little bit more. So I think in terms of, like I've been saying the last couple of weeks, what I expect people to use it for is being able to air dash in a parkour course. I think it's in a good place now where there's going to be a mix of like a little bit punishing if you're not super accurate with your jumps, but it's still going to feel like you can complete a course without having to worry about the spear breaking or just completely running out of food in the process. It feels like the best of both worlds to me now.
Yeah, it also makes a lot of sense too in terms of like 1, 2, and 3 applying hunger points in the form of 1, 2, and 3. Right?
Yeah, it's easy
lines
maths.
up, easy to remember, that kind of stuff for sure.
Yes, definitely.
Moving on in chunk mail, if you'd like to email the show, as Johnny mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the email address is spunchunkmail@gmail.com. Please keep the emails short and to the point. It does help us include those in the show more easily. There's a bit of a trend lately where the emails have been getting longer and longer to the tune of like 400 to 500 words, which are just too long and sometimes kind of convoluted to include in the show. So if it's a really wordy explanation, then maybe take the time to distill it down into something more concise, especially if you've got more than one point to make. I would say those are 2 separate emails, which you can do. Absolutely send them in, but it makes it a lot easier for us to include them in the show if they're shorter and don't have like long technical explanations, because as Johnny and I have mentioned before, like it's like doing Redstone live on stream. Like someone in the chat is ultimately trying to describe how to do it for you, and you don't really grasp it because there's just a lot of technical stuff that happens. And so sometimes with concepts in the emails, it's the same thing. So if you wouldn't mind keeping them short and concise, it does help us include them in the show. And Johnny has the first one from the Nookie.
Yes, for an example of a concise email, this comes in from Landscape Artist member of our Discord, The Nookie, and the subject is, I have a ghast idea. Again, very straightforward. We love that. Hi, Johnny and Joel. Regarding wanting a way to speed up the ghast, what if you get a flute added to a special slot next to your armor and equipment? This flute could be bound to a hotkey, which then signals the ghast different things, like speeding up, or maybe commanding the ghast to shoot a wind burst. It should also have a cooldown, like a carrot on a stick. The interaction would feel natural, and sound is used in the real world to communicate with trained animals. Both Windburst and the flute are very air-themed. What are your thoughts? Love the podcast. Colourful greetings. The Nookie ran out of breath, and thus lost the ghast race.
It's not a bad idea. It does hinge on a new inventory slot, like a trinket slot, being added to the game, which I would love and would be super cool, but I don't have a lot of money on. I'm not holding my breath for that, because another item to carry around while I direct my Happy Ghast with an inventory full of blocks I want to build with is not something I want to sacrifice. So that to me is like the linchpin of this idea, is that it's a trinket thing. It's a different way of controlling the Ghast. I do like wind bursts and the wind instrument. Like, I think it's a cool way of looking at it. Like, it works thematically, and in the same way that they had a lot of trapdoors and things in the trial chambers that the breeze would be able to manipulate and move with its wind charges and stuff like that. So I think that that's kind of fun. I wonder if an existing wind charge interaction between wind charges and Happy Ghasts could be worked out in the game as a because again, air themed, that could be kind of fun. Although if the Happy Ghast is using commands from a flute to be scooted around in the world, I can imagine it would be very easy for resource pack developers to change that dash effect into a fart noise, and it would be fun for a little while. I think it would be funny to have the Ghast scooting along and making whatever kind of air noises it's going to make. The Ghast is already pretty cumbersome, and so I don't know if a speed burst is necessarily going to make them better, because it's already, like, you still have to turn, and turning is still slow. So just moving forward like a lunge, enchantment doesn't really appeal to me with the Happy Ghast. I'm not worried about how fast I can move forward. I'm not using it to traverse landscapes. I'm using it to go up and down and move around and potentially build stuff, which again, I'm probably not using because I find them really cumbersome. I also think from a gameplay design perspective that the problem with a sound-based control of a mob would be the distance, or not the timing between playing a sound on the flute and having the Ghast react. And I think that just because of the gameplay of that, you'd have to hear the flute noise, and then the Ghast would have to react to hearing the flute noise. And even though that could be very quick, it would not be as quick as press button, move forward. And I think that disconnect would be a little bit weird. I don't know if that's necessarily the way that you'd want to go. I could see the flute being as like a recall, like a summon command. I would love to have something as a trinket that would just have, the mob follow you around, because I don't like carrying snowballs. I don't have them on me very often. I have to leave a box of snowballs next to my Ghast if I ever want to move it. So I don't find that very practical. And if I could have a trinket that I could just leave on me while I'm working with Happy Ghasts, or insert other animals, like maybe you can put seeds in your trinket slot to have your chickens follow you around so that you could not have to hold it in your hand. That kind of thing could be interesting. I don't know about speed boosts and things like that for the Happy Ghasts. For me, I think it's more about the controls and making the controls feel more intuitive than the speed of it. The speed I don't necessarily think is the deal breaker for me. It's more the cumbersome nature of the Happy Ghast.
I think the arguments for Happy Ghasts being faster come from players who want to use them more for transportation, and the feature that you can bring mobs in boats underneath the underside of Happy Ghasts. I see a lot of people talking about wanting to use them to transport villagers, and the outcome of that is it's very convenient to do it. You can fly over the obstacles instead of, needing to build like minecart tracks over mountains or whatever. But they are, or at least they feel, very slow when you're used to flying around at elytra speeds. And I don't think we're going to see Happy Ghasts fly that fast anytime soon, but I can understand the desire for something like that. And the image of it that comes into my head is much less of like an elytra boost where you use a rocket once, you get up to a certain speed, and then you sort of, you either fly at that speed for a while, or typically like you lose a bit of momentum, you have to boost yourself again to pick up momentum. I think of it like using a warped fungus on a stick when you're riding a strider. And the strider takes a while, you use the warped fungus, it sort of accelerates to a maximum speed and stays at that speed for a while. And it just gives it like a little boost when it's maneuvering around open lava lakes in the nether, just to make it feel like you're not walking above this very perilous environment at a snail's pace. Like, I think the way they boost the strider speed actually feels quite good. And so I wonder if there are if there's potential for players who want to use the Ghast for transport as opposed to the fly up, detail a couple of things on the balcony of a building and then come back down. It's sort of what I've been using it for in the Windy City builds. I think there is potential for that to be included at some stage in future. The flute option is whimsical and fun as a concept, but I think it feels a little bit too specialized because, again, you're using, you're inventing a new inventory slot, you're inventing a whole new item, and it's just for people who think the Happy Ghast is a little bit too slow for transport purposes. And I like the idea that there would be multiple functions to the flute, but then you've got to consider how are those controlled by not just keyboard and mouse players, but also mobile players and console players and so forth. So I think having the extra sort of usage of the flute there is maybe a little bit too specialized. As a compromise that I thought of, though, and using an item that's already in the game, what about goat horns? What if you play any of the goat horns in the game, and that, if you're riding on a Happy Ghast at the time, encourages the Happy Ghast to speed up a little bit in the same way that a strider might? Like, I think it's potentially even something you could make a data pack for, because movement speed is an attribute you can change using data pack, and so maybe like you give it 10 seconds where it catches up to like the speed that a horse might be able to run, and then it goes back down to Happy Ghast speed after 10 seconds, 15, whatever you want. I think it's possible to do stuff like that. So it could be a fun little project if somebody wants to give that a try. Outside of that, the other thing I loved about this email is the notion that Happy Ghast could shoot a wind charge the way Nether Ghasts shoot fireballs. I think that's great. Again, I'm not certain how you would end up controlling that, because Happy Ghast's controls are already a little bit kind of convoluted, and you've got the notion that if you're right-clicking or left-clicking, you're, as a player, doing the actions that you associate with that stuff. Even with an empty hand, right-clicking with a wind charge might sort of mess up some stuff, so it'd have to be fairly deliberate. But I do like the idea that, you could control them in a certain way. We saw them, the characters in the Minecraft movie were using them to like shoot fireballs because it was a Ghast clearly from the Nether. And so the notion that you have a little bit of control over that, but because it's a Happy Ghast, it's not fueled by fire, it's been sort of rehydrated, and therefore like it just being a relatively harmless wind charge instead of a destructive fireball is quite an appealing idea.
Yeah, you could get together with a couple of friends and like wind charge carpet bomb your favorite village.
just flip all their trapdoors and that kind of thing.
Watch the villagers dance around. I like the wind charge idea to it. I mean, it's the same way with the boost. Like, I mean, sound effects and the wind charge. Like, it just adds flavor to something, and I think that's cool. I do like the idea of adding a little bit of something to the Ghast for people that are using it for transportation. That's a fun idea. I mean, I could see some fun data packs too, where like a snowball on a stick is, something that can be created, and then that increases your travel speed on a Ghast. It's silly. It's very Minecrafty. And depending on the data pack, like you could increase that speed to whatever you want. I mean, it could be kind of silly how fast they could go for a non-aerodynamic box in the sky, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could extrapolate it any number of ways, like, craft a harness together with some firework rockets, and then you can boost them with fireworks the way Elytra could, and you have a rocket harness,
right.
Like you can take it in all sorts of cartoony directions, and I imagine there are like Bedrock add-ons and stuff like that will probably do things like this already. But yeah, I think as a vanilla feature, I imagine it's a bit more realistic that Mojang would just increase the max speed of the Ghast at some stage, just because if players aren't really using them at their current speed, then maybe they can come to some sort of compromise. But I think that's something for a little way down the road. So we'll see what happens as more player feedback comes through about the Happy Ghast.
Our second email comes in from Lizosaurus13. Updated beacons. Hi, Pix and Joel. During a recent FWIP stream, there was a long discussion on overhauling beacons. This could potentially tie in to the beacon base material, emerald, diamond, and netherite, to different powers, such as only getting haste 1 in lower level beacons or being able to instamine deep slate with a fully netherite beacon. That one was FWIP's thought. Do you think a beacon overhaul could come in the future? Lizosaurus13 finally decided deep slate wasn't a pain to mine thanks to her new netherite beacon.
As somebody who's had to mine out a lot of deep slate recently by hand, I do sympathize. I don't think, as somebody who's made a netherite beacon, a full netherite beacon in the past, I don't think that's the thing to do it. Like, it's one of those, like, you're doing the maths in your head, you're trying to calculate how much time it takes to get a full tier 4 netherite beacon compared to just staying in the hole and mining deep slate for a little bit longer, and I think the deep slate hole wins, because, like, I was working pretty hard at gathering netherite for my beacon base in Survival Guide Season 1. I was streaming multiple times a week. I had to farm TNT, as AFKing at my mob farm as often as I could, farming sand the rest of the time. Long ancient debris mining sessions. It still took me about 4 months to complete a full netherite beacon. You have to gather, I think, around 6,000 ancient debris to completely get a netherite block for like the full netherite beacon of like 164 netherite blocks. And I feel like this not only requires you to not use valuable resources like netherite and diamond for their crafting recipes, which feels like a pretty decent penalty. It just requires players to buy into the idea that there is such a long grind ahead of you just so you can do something fairly mundane like mine deep slate. I feel like that's not quite the economy of time we want in this game. Because I think there are, like, players will come up with a lot more creative and a lot more, inventive ways of mining deep slates that shrug off the idea of using a beacon to do it and mining manually. Like, you just find anybody who's got a tunnel bore design, and you'll find something that you can probably construct in a fraction of the time that it would take you to make a netherite beacon. And then, yes, you're not going to get all of the blocks, but at least you clear out the space. I think so often mining deep slate is not even about collecting materials. It's about clearing room for other builds, farms, whatever it happens to be, right? The final thing I will say about this is that you have a multiplayer issue, because as soon as you make a beacon out of netherite, somebody is coming along and stealing your netherite blocks, because it's going to take you several months to get enough netherite that you can do that, and it's going to take them 30 seconds to walk up, steal a few of them, and then run off, and then you've got to replace those with more netherite, so good luck. I think, obviously, you and I play on servers where everyone's chill. Like, the Citadel is not going to have any serial thieves coming along and stealing your diamond blocks because they think it's fun. Other multiplayer projects I've been on obviously have, like, the gentleman's rule, kind of like, we're not going to mess with each other unless it's for good content, and there's a chance that it can just be undone very easily. But if you consider more casual multiplayer servers, first of all, the notion that anybody's going to, like, put together a netherite beacon is quite far-fetched to begin with, because a lot of people are going to want that for netherite armor and equipment and everything. But then as soon as somebody has a substantial amount of that, some other, individual, some griefer or whatever, is going to come along and steal it, and then you've got a whole, like, server-wide crisis on your hands at that stage. And the same is even true of diamonds. Like, I think diamonds are relatively, like, they're still prized by Minecraft players, despite them being relatively straightforward to find if you know the game well enough. And I can't imagine them wanting to put players through the hassle of having to plumb for a full netherite beacon to do some mining if they're a casual player. Like, that's just not going to happen on a realistic timescale for the average Minecraft player. For folks like FWIP, who are, like, thousands and thousands of days into their hardcore worlds and looking for ways to make the game easier for themselves, perhaps without some high explosives, just in case there's a risk of them losing the world, I completely understand, but I don't think full netherite beacon is really the way to go about it.
Yeah, that's not something that appeals to me either. To your note about diamonds, when I was digging the holes for the beacons that I've placed around the Mushroom Island, I was just digging straight down 2 blocks wide, just kind of like making sure that I was trying to be as safe as possible. I did end up dying, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, but most of the time it was a safe tunnel down. And I would say every time we found at least 1 block of diamonds, if not 8.
Yeah.
Just in that one space going straight down, because there's so much vertical material to get through from Y70 down to negative 64 that you ultimately just see at least one diamond. And if we didn't find it in the corridor going down, in the 11 by 11 hole that I had to dig to house the beacon at the bottom of the world, we would find some diamonds there too. So it was really not difficult at all at endgame to find some diamonds if for whatever reason you didn't have enough. But like, I can't remember what it is, but I've got something like 40 blocks of diamonds just sitting in my ender chest for like when I need them, because like I haven't used them for much in recent memory. We were talking about beacons though the other day on stream, similar to Flip, because again, I moved 4 beacons. I'm now officially out of Wither Skulls. I have to go get more of those if I want more beacons. As I've been spacing beacons around the island, because it helps with removing the mushrooms. They take a little bit longer without the beacons. With the beacons, you can just insta-mine them with an axe. So it does speed up the removal of them. And as you get farther and farther from the center, you need more beacons to expand your range. And in thinking about the different ways that we could have beacons affect what we were doing, I went back to thinking about a point that Cubfan made years ago, which was that as an endgame player, you really don't have a lot of control over mobs. Now, this was back before mob spawning went down to 0. It was still at 7 light level. But his idea was to have beacons be something that you could affect mob level, or mob spawning rather. And I thought, well, if you made the beacon out of different blocks, like light blocks, then you could perhaps have a beacon with a different size and strength, have a radius be spawn proof, where right now I don't have to worry about it because I'm on a mushroom island. The lush caves, of course, still have some spawning, but those I light up. But in a regular situation, if you wanted to do like a cyberpunk city in a meadows biome or something, or a cherry grove for some really cool color, you're going to be subject to mob spawning everywhere at night unless you light everything up to just the right amount. And I thought that having a beacon control that would be cool. And if the source blocks of the beacon aren't really appealing, like building it out of frog lights or building it out of shroom lights or sea lanterns or whatever, to have it be a different scale, then also the block that you sacrifice in it could be something that creates a different effect. So rather than just like a gold or a iron ingot as it is now with a couple of other things, I think emeralds as well, instead, like, have maybe the light block is what you sacrifice, or maybe something else, is what you sacrifice to have the beacon have a different effect. I do think for the lighting thing and the spawn radius, it would have to be wider than a 50 block radius, or at least something available beyond that would be important, because otherwise you're just going to have beacons everywhere, and it's not really going to be something that players want. Which leads me to my other point, which is I think it would be nice to be able to control the beacon beam a little bit more. The fact that they go straight to the sky, you have to have them go all the way up to the top of the world. The fact that they don't jive with fantasy and a lot of other stuff in Minecraft means that you either have to hide them or use them temporarily. And I didn't use them at all in Westall because they were just always an eyesore in the back of my screenshots. And it was just such a pain to go turn it off, take a screenshot, come back. So unless I was doing something really arduous in West Hill, I really didn't use beacons at all. And even in the sci-fi zone, they work great right now. Like, they feel kind of part of the vibe, but like, I might not want them to be part of my final design. And if that's the case, then I'm not going to use them. And it's too bad because they look really cool. They look very sci-fi. I would love to be able to control the height of them. I would love to be able to say like, oh, I want to make a beacon laser door. I don't have to have the top of the door open to the sky. I just want to have that be part of the build. That could be kind of fun. It would be neat, although we joked about this on stream. It would be neat, but technically really complicated if they weren't vertical, but if you could make them horizontal. Because again, like, you do some cool laser effects with sci-fi builds, but
Yeah.
like, when does that end, right? Because like, it's 256 is great. There's a finite end to it. But like, when you're going horizontal, like, how do you handle that? Does it just fade out of existence? If you're flying alongside of it, does it never end? Like, there's a lot of stuff that would be complicated. But I like the idea of being able to control it. And right now I know that you can control the color. Like, you can put a different pane or glass block on top of it and changes the color, but it just changes the color from that point up. They don't mix. So like, if you wanted to have something maybe like a lighter purple or something like that, you can't put like a purple glass block and then a white glass block and get a light purple. It just changes it to white. So being able to manipulate the colors could be kind of fun. But right now I'm more concerned about like turning it off and on, controlling the length of it, and having some different abilities for it. Like, just getting some different effects in there would be fun.
Yeah, I like the idea of there being different materials providing different effects. Like, imagine iron gives you strength and resistance, and emerald gives you jump
Right.
boost and swiftness, or something like that. Like, there's a little bit of variety, and then maybe you have to sacrifice a diamond or a netherite ingot to get haste and one other effect, for example. Because, like, with diamonds, at that point, you've got an efficiency 5 diamond pickaxe probably if you're going to be instant mining with haste,
Yeah.
and you can get that effect. So a diamond here and there is probably not going to matter that much to you. And then maybe netherite provides something that's even more haste, or it provides an overall extra boost to your efficiency that you can harvest deep slate. And maybe it's sort of split up so that you have to use specific materials to get each of those effects, because I think the beacon UI has room for it to be restructured in that way. And that's the kind of thing that I think the strength of the beacon UI is, that it's one of those things where the pictographs in here are enough to show you sort of what you need to do with it. The pyramid needs to have additional tiers built for it so that you can access the secondary powers that it gives you, and so forth. I do think there's a bit of that has space that could be restructured into, okay, emerald gives you this and this, iron gives you this and this, diamond gives you this and that. I think that could work out pretty well. So I'm on board with them restructuring beacons in the future. I think there is precedent for stuff like that being overhauled a little bit, so it makes more sense for the modern game. I don't think the tier of the beacon structure should really be part of that, because that's something that's so easily modified at a moment's notice, and that's going to mess with gameplay stuff. So I look forward to more on that discussion in future, because I'm certain people will come forward with some new ideas for beacons. It seems to be one of those evergreen arguments that gets made about beacons. So share your thoughts. Would love to hear from more folks who think the same.
Speaking of discussions, we're going to move on to talk about the camel husk and the new parched mob that are in the game. They are announced in the snapshot. People can go in and mess around with them. You can kind of see what they look like. And we thought we would just kind of give our initial thoughts. I've not had any time with them personally in game. I'm not sure about you, Pix.
I've spent a little bit of time in this snapshot, but not like the usual thing where I go in survival and try and find one. It felt like the kind of thing that I could just pop in creative, set the time to night, and then I'd see all I needed to see. My first and foremost thought is that neither of them drop sand, so automatic 0 out of 10. But no, jokes aside, I think it's an interesting discussion to breach at this point, because I think lately Mojang has earned back a lot of the sort of balance of good faith, because they've got original ideas coming in alongside these mob variants. And back in the day when husks got added and then drowned or announced a couple of updates later, I think a lot of people kind of got on the train of like bashing Mojang for saying, oh, it's another zombie variant, like hurrah, another zombie, what are we going to do for the next update, a fourth zombie? And then obviously since then they've gone from strength to strength in terms of original creatures being added to the game, and I think that's great. So now we're back here at a couple of variants of existing mobs. We've had the Happy Ghast, which does still feel like something a little different, something a little new. And now we have another skeleton variant and a variant of the camel. And I think this feels like a good update in which to do this, because for a start, the camel adds another mount, which is something people were concerned about when Mounts of Mayhem was announced, that it was just going to be the Nautilus and the Zombie Horse, and we already knew about the Zombie Horse because it was already technically in the game. So the fact that they've added another mount in the form of the Camel Husk is a good one. I don't think I've heard as much community complaint and eye rolling as we got in previous years, which I think means they're on the right track with stuff like this. That said, neither of these mobs is especially a huge draw for me. I imagine you're probably the same, where like this isn't turning around Mounts of Mayhem for me into a 10 out of 10 must-have update. But with it, it's potentially 4 or 5 weeks away at this point if we're expecting it to come out in the first couple of weeks of December. So it makes sense that they had a couple of unannounced features that were still in scope for the updates. So I'm glad that we're getting confirmation that wasn't absolutely everything announced at Minecraft Live.
Yeah, I mean, because they follow the same spawning rules as the husk, it's good for folks that, like you and I, that are just not super interested, that you can basically just avoid them if you don't want to bother. Like, they're not going to be thrust in your face as something you then have to deal with in meadows. Every time the sun goes down, there's going to be multiple mobs with passengers that are trying to go and get you. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and as an end game player, I don't know if it would bother me that much anyway. Like you just fly away or shoot it with an arrow or whatever. But yeah, I can't say that I'm super excited about the idea. I'm surprised that I haven't yet seen people completely drop off and start calling camel husks zombie camels. Like I feel like there's a good bet that that's what they're going to be called by the general population without actually calling them camel husks, because it's again right up to the same tricks with Minecraft. They're just calling things names that don't roll off the tongue and kind of go against things that we've had in the game forever. And while I think the Nautilus is an interesting enough addition to the game, a zombie horse and a camel husk to me are just like, well, they're just undead versions of stuff we already have. They don't function any differently per se as far as me the player goes, so it's not nearly as exciting. Not again, like the Nautilus isn't having me do cartwheels, but it's still cool. Like it's still a neat idea. It adds life to the oceans. Like there's a lot of benefits to it. I don't want to come down on anybody that's really excited about the Nautilus, of course, but yeah, I don't see a lot of people being excited about something like a camel husk. Now, on the flip side, I do, looking at the parched, it looks cool. Like it doesn't just look like a brown version of a stray, right? Like it has its own identity. Same with the bog. The bog look good. They're a skeleton, but you don't get them mixed up with anything else, which I think is great. Like they have a unique silhouette, color scheme. The thing I like about the parch is that they look like bad guys from like the old Mummy movies with Brandon Fraser, that kind of stuff. And so going to be great for people that if you can name tag one and capture it and have it wander around your pyramid, like that's awesome. Like there's some fun flavor with them. And they even remind me of the old stop motion skeletons from like the Clash of the Titans movies. I'm not sure if you've seen those.
Like the Ray Harryhausen kind of effect.
Old stuff in a good way. Like they have that vibe where I think there's something about the skeletons as we know them in the game that just have the weapon and nothing else that feels very cartoony, whereas something with like clothing that used to be on it or wraps that are kind of draped around it like the parched has, it adds something to it. It provides some context as like, what did that skeleton used to be before it was a skeleton? Because like a skeleton doesn't need clothes to keep warm, so why does it have them in the first place? So that kind of stuff I think is cool. It provides a lot more depth to the enemy that you're facing, and it's more of a unique look, whereas a skeleton is like really straightforward. So I think that's cool. I don't know about the arrows of weakness. I mean, that's fine. I'm glad it's not something like a flaming arrow, because that would be a pain in the butt. But for people that want to capitalize on unique cases for renewable items in the game, then you could potentially farm parched for unique weakness arrows and not have to make a weakness potion. If that's because I think I would rather do that than get all the ingredients to go through the convoluted way of brewing. Like I don't like the brewing mechanics in the game, and I would much rather get the thing I want from a drop than from a brewing situation. So if I can do it one way, I'll do it the way that you get it from a mob.
Yeah, I agree. I think the weakness arrows make sense to me because you've already got bogged with poison and strays with slowness, and those are really the three principal negative effects that, like, they have a duration. Like there's harming arrows, obviously, but they just do extra damage instantly, right? So I think outside of that, in terms of negative effects, there aren't really that many. You could have like, invisibility or something like that. There's not really too many negatives to that one. So I think that's it kind of rounds out the set a little bit, and that sort of implies to me, especially now we've got, like, it's not like the drowned is necessarily a cold variant of a zombie, but we have the seafaring variant of a zombie, a regular zombie, and a husk. We have the strays, regular skeletons, and parched, and I guess bogged as well. But it kind of reminds me now of how they have warm, temperate, and cold variants of the animals. It sort of feels like things in these like loose groups of 3 or 4. That's probably about as expansive as that can get without getting into like giant boss skeleton or something along those lines, right? So I think it makes sense that this might be one of the last skeleton variants we see, unless they do a skeletal form of some other kind of creature in future. But I think The arrows thing, I think if you're looking for curing zombie villagers and getting weakness arrows for that, that could be a good way of doing it. If you can't get those traded from a Fletcher, and the alternative is, get lingering weakness potions from farming Dragon's Breath, and the sort of convoluted way you have to craft them in Java Edition, at least, it kind of changes up the economy for that. And I've known a lot of people who try and go to the last trade of a Fletcher to get weakness arrows so that they can cure zombie villagers using that. You could even, if you wanted to, trap a parched and have them shoot the zombie villager for you, provided that you could guarantee the zombie villager wouldn't just straight up die from the arrow hit. And then, that could be a neat way of using them in a zombie villager curing apparatus. I've even seen some players suggest quicksand blocks as a means to convert regular skeletons into parched, the same way powder snow works for strays. And my main concern there is, quicksand might end up making deserts kind of miserable, but depending on how they implemented it. But as adults of a certain age, we know the adventure movies of our youth teaching us to fear quicksand like it was something we were going to run into frequently. So I think overall, the Parched, I think, have a lot of character. It'd be really fun to tap friend of the show Archeo Plays for some insight into what it means that a skeleton is sort of wrapped in pre-existing clothing from this sort of fictional desert civilization that might have existed at some stage, and they're now undead, right? And I think it's cool that they spawn on camel husks as well. I think that the main thing about the camel husk for me is that it's a neat way of signaling to players who might not be aware of this already that the camel can have two riders, because they always spawn with a spear-wielding husk and a skeleton on the back, a parched sort of firing arrows at you. And so the second rider being a ranged specialist even is something that it sort of suggests gameplay to the player in a fun, subtle way. I did briefly go into survival just to see what it was like having one of these things run at you with a spear-wielding husk. It's frightening. They're very fast, and faster than you expect from camels especially, and I don't know if the husk is capable of using the camel's dash attack, but if it is, then that's going to be something you'll need a shield for, I think, because the amount of damage a charged spear attack can do to you if you're being dashed at by a camel is probably quite significant. So I think there's definitely a case for these being in the game, although I agree that zombie camel was not necessarily on my list of things I was expecting, and unlike the Nautilus, there isn't really a ton of precedent for it in the same way that Nautilus had Nautilus shells in the game before this, and so it sort of implies the existence of a Nautilus, whether you consider it, it was extinct or something like that. Whereas camel husks kind of came out of nowhere. It was maybe just an idea that there are zombies in the desert and they would go after any source of meat, and so they've just decided to eat this camel, and then, camel husk emerges out of that. But I guess it's a shrug from me, and why not? They kind of look like a baked potato to me. The first time I saw one, I saw a screenshot of it kind of from the top down a little bit, and it kind of has the seam of hair along the back of it, like the sort of camel's mane, I guess you might call it. And I thought that just looked like the seam of a baked potato that's kind of been, pre-sliced before you put it in the oven, and it's been left in the oven for slightly too long. I think this is going to be fun for Zookeeper style players, right? This is going to be fun for people who like to collect and display all of the different mobs. The fact that, it's persistent once a player rides it, and like the Nautilus and Zombie Nautilus, it's not really going to hurt you if you're riding it as a player. Like the fact that a zombie mount is still something you can keep around as a player is kind of fun. So I don't think there's anything particularly bad to say about this. I doubt we'll run into them all that often, especially as endgame players, because you and I don't really have any, we don't do desert builds all that much.
No.
You're building on a mushroom island right now. I haven't really done a desert build since Pixandria and Empire Season 1, and that means I'm not spending a lot of time in a desert at night. Any time I'm spending in a desert is probably farming sand for concrete powder or TNT or various other things, and I'm doing that during the day, and I'm sleeping as soon as it gets to nighttime because I don't want to light up this entire area with torches and then break all the torches again because I'm farming out layers of sand. So I doubt I would run into them all that much in the course of standard gameplay unless I decided to move out to a desert and start a build project there. At which point, you also don't have to worry about running into them in caves, because neither of them spawn in caves. And I think that's part of the problem I have with Parched. Like, I feel like it's kind of weird when you add a new mob, but you give it such restrictive spawning conditions that it's just on the surface, just at night in light level 0. And the problem with the husk, I mean, it was not so much a problem, actually. It was kind of like an interesting fact about the husk, was that if you build one of those multi-tier mob farms with solid spawning platforms, husks wouldn't spawn in there. But since they constituted a decent proportion of the zombie spawns in a desert biome, if you built a mob farm in a desert, you would get fewer zombie spawns, which means you'd get more skeletons, spiders, creepers, and you could build a mob farm there to potentially gather a lot more gunpowder, bones, and that kind of thing.
Right.
The thing about the Parched being introduced is it follows the same spawning rules. So if it's, it can't spawn underneath a shelter of a solid block, meaning that you're no longer getting as many skeletons in those desert-based hostile mob farms. You're now getting more creepers and spiders and then fewer skeletons and zombies. And obviously that's part of the course. Like, you can build a mob farm basically anywhere, and there are ways of limiting what you get out of it. But I don't think that necessarily means that creeper farms end up being more efficient in deserts. But I think it's interesting that there were some use cases for players using that biome specifically for getting more bones, more gunpowder, and then like less rotten flesh to deal with ultimately. And now the same is true of skeletons as well. So there might be a couple of fringe cases where the technical game is affected by the spawning rules of these mobs too.
The farm that I put in our desert really early on, before we had even beaten the dragon, was an Enderman farm, where you would just create a platform in the middle of the desert. Because the desert was pretty flat, you could see the Enderman from far away. So
and
they
just stand out against the sand texture as well. Yeah.
And so you would just create a platform and just start looking at Enderman all evening long, and then they would come up, try to get you, and then you'd be under 2 blocks and they would be under 3, and then you just kind of walk over and hit their ankles and slowly but surely collect some ender pearls that way. It took a long time. It wasn't very fast, but the desert was the best place to do it, because at the time, like your zombies and things that would be spawning a lot in, say, a plains biome wouldn't be happening so much in a desert. And also, like you said, the terrain was flat and high contrast, so easy to see them at night. So I don't know if that still works, but we've not had to do that because I've got a ender, of course, in the end for all of our ender pearls. But the thing about the let's call them husks, the Parched, that I think would be more interesting is something that you mentioned as a joke, but like the ability to have some sort of renewable sand. If you somehow were able to give that to players through whatever mechanic, it could be tied to either of these new mobs or existing mobs. Even if like the husk and the Parched dropped different things that you had to then combine into sand, in the same way that sand and gravel combine into concrete powder. Like if you had 2 components of sand, like slate and glass or something like that, and you had to combine them, I feel like there could be some ways to work that in there to make it a little bit more exciting for players. You mentioned quicksand again as a joke, but if you think about how we have renewable lava from dripstone, like if quicksand dripped into cauldrons and turned into sand, like that's renewable sand. It would be slow, but like give a Minecraft player a day and they'll come up with a large enough farm where it's no longer slow. Right. Yeah. So I feel like those kind of things as options could be kind of fun. I like you. I don't think I would want quicksand in deserts, because I feel like a lot of what I use my deserts for is just mining, just clear cut mining. And every now and again, having to like run into a spot where I'm being slowed down, potentially suffocated, like that would just be a pain in the butt. I don't want that to change, because something we were talking about on stream the other day was how much faster it is to remove large chunks of land on the Mushroom Island with the beacon. And I was saying that with the right shovel enchant, a swiftness potion, and a beacon with speed on it in a desert, you can just dismantle sand and get a ton without very much effort. And it makes it fun because it's so fast, it's kind of silly. And you can just kind of go back and forth like a reverse 3D printer and just like chew the landscape up. And that's cool, but it's still time consuming. And if there's ways to kind of create alternate ways to get sand, so if you want to do that, that's one way. If you want to get it automatically but it's really slow, that's another way, but it's also happening in the background. So you can cater to player sacrifice. Like if you want to sacrifice your time and energy, you can do it this way. If you want to, as you're talking about with the David build. If you want to take the time to create a really elaborate redstone structure to farm sand, if it were possible in the game, then you can. But it's different amount of time investment on one end or the other, right?
Yeah, I think the problem with either parched or I guess the camel husks, but also husks, dropping anything useful like that is that they only spawn on the surface. And so
Yeah.
whatever mob farm you make to farm these components has to be probably like a big slime block flying machine sweeper on like a surface platform. It only works at night. And, there's so many little kind of bits and pieces that make it not the ideal solution to something like this. So I'm still, again, holding out hope for renewable sand as always, but maybe this isn't the drop for it after all. Either way, we have another mount, we have more mayhem, and we have potentially 4 or 5 weeks before this update arrives. So looking forward to seeing if we get any more snapshots with features this week, or if they just start going into bug fixes and declare it feature complete. Either way, we will find out next week, because for now, that wraps up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. We get all of our revenue for doing the show from you folks over on Patreon. So if you want to join and get some value back in the show that you're getting some value out of, you can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. You can also participate in Hangouts, where you get to share what you've been up to in Minecraft and also hear a bit more behind-the-scenes info from Joel and I. We currently have 265 patrons. We would love to see that number increase throughout November and December. And special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, and That Penguin Dude. Thank you for your support on this episode.
And thanks to the patrons over the last month that have switched their membership over from a monthly to an annual membership. Very much appreciated. And there'll be more about that actually in the upcoming quarterly hangout. That's, I believe, coming up on this Saturday. So keep your eye out for that in the Discord. Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us at the Spawn Chunks on your favorite social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including video versions on YouTube and on Spotify. Email us at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where things are a little slow right now while I've got family visiting, but the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. You can also occasionally find me streaming over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Pixelriffs. I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which should be back once Season 11 returns. You can find that through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
I will point you towards the Citadel Cafe, which has a new episode out. I was watching the live action version of How to Train Your Dragon. Steven has been into Severance, and we were both looking at some cool animated feature products. One is called Dispatch, which is a video game, and the other one is All I Need Is Die. I think that's the right title. It's an anime that's coming out. So some really, really fun stuff talked about on the last episode of the Citadel Cafe. Incidentally, that's episode 499. So the big 500 is coming up next time. So I'm hoping to do something special for that. So keep your ears peeled for that. And of course, I stream on Twitch, usually Tuesday through Friday at 9 a.m. now, and Saturdays at 1 o'clock, mostly Minecraft, because the Sci-Fi Command Center has taken over my brain.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but the desert is dangerous.